Early music ensembles can shed new light on the past, but they can also be incubators of new works. The Boston area ensemble Cappella Clausura is taking its focus on works by women to a new level by commissioning new compositions based on works dating from the Middle Ages in Europe, as well as styles from other places and times. To tell us about the results in a concert and new recording are two of the contributors, the ensemble's founder and director, Amelia LeClair, and composer and lecturer at MIT, Elena Ruehr. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to start with Amelia about this project. You've been discovering and rediscovering these overlooked composers all these years, and now you say, well, let's turn this into new music. I mean, what got you onto this?
Two things. Elena and I had a conversation some time ago about, I don't know, composing early music, and it occurred to me that there is a book in which the staves to the music are shown, the words are shown under the staves. It's an ancient manuscript, and it's signed by the Duchess de Lorraine. There are no notes, and so I thought, well, that's a direct invitation, isn't it? We ought to fill those notes in. So I talked with Elena, and soon she sent me this gorgeous piece that you will hear. And from this, on the strength of that, I thought, well, let's diversify, because the classical music world is so notoriously intransigent about accepting women as composers as well as people of color. And so I thought, well, let's just break that up a little bit. So I asked some composers that I knew and had heard of. Bea Steadwell is a new composer to me. I found out about her at the Gardner Museum when she came out with a lute box and sang Barbara Strozzi, and I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then I also thought, well, I know this wonderful Bengali singer. Maybe I'll ask her. And so I did, and no one said no.
To Elena Ruehr, tell me a little bit about the piece that you produced here, because as Amelia mentioned, this is by the Duchess of Lorraine. You filled in the blanks on that score. What did you come up with?
Well, I chose just one stanza of one of her pieces, and it was inspired by the fact that my mom had passed, and I wanted to write something for her. She was a folk singer, and I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to write something that had a kind of folk song feel to it. And the poem itself spoke to me. It's a poem of grief, and I felt like I could kind of go back in time, recreate it, and then bring it forward into the present through this piece.
And this is not what people expect from early music, and very early music at that. This is a great tune.
Thanks. I guess. I hope she'd like it.
Amelia, what about the work that you put together? Because this was based on a troubadour, a female troubadour. I guess she would have been a troubadors, Beatrice de Dia. Tell me about her poem.
Well, she has a couple of poems. She's the only troubadors with a piece of music that is actually ascribed to her. It's in the Manuscrit du Roi, which is a huge manuscript of poetry and music from 12th, 14th century. And she actually appears in that. And so all of us who look into the troubadour music look at that as our example of how to write music. So Beatrice de Dia, 12th century troubadors from some near Spain. And she has a couple of poems in the book that I used as my Bible, which is Meg Bogan's book called The Women Troubadours. And from that book, I actually chose several different troubadors for the composers to set. So she's one of them that appears in there, but the most famous, definitely.
Not surprisingly, as far as we can tell, this was a field dominated by men as far as the poetry and the music production. But what about the women? What do you take away about that?
Well, one of the things that they say about the women in particular is that their writing was more intimate. It wasn't meant to be a competition as the men's writing was. It became very competitive, kind of gamesmanship at the end of an evening where one singer-songwriter would try to better his fellow next to him and say, I can write a better song, kind of thing. Code language, lots of code language. Who is this song for? Is it for the Lord? Is it for his lady? Is it for the Lord choosing the lady? Whereas the women's music was much more about how much I love you, how much I find you worthy, or how much I'm trapped in this horrible situation with a husband that I don't like. So it was much more intimate. We think that maybe they only sang it in their chambers. We really don't know.
Elena, another thing that I pick up from hearing, not just this new composition of yours, but even going back to that part of the quartet you mentioned that was inspired by Hildegard, there's something moving in that music, and it suggests your background in dance. How does that fit in?
Oh, that's a question that makes me pause. I think that my background in dance, well, I think, yeah, my background in dance influenced my work. I think that Hildegard floats in a way above, there's no beat in that music in the sense, but I love beat and I love dance and I love the sense of movement. So I just needed to put that in there. And I imagine some troubadours singing not in the court, but maybe, in a bar somewhere, and having something a little bit more lighthearted and fun and silly. And that would be, I mean, not that my piece is silly, but that sense of rhythm and beat would happen in that situation. But we don't know. So I just went with my imagination.
Amelia, what about rhythm and beat? Because even in the Middle Ages, troubadours are saying you set the words to the music, and you look at some of the things they come up with, some of these intricate rhymes, spitfire rhymes, very, very competitive, very, very polished. Aren't we getting into the hip hop zone there?
That's a good one. Well, as a matter of fact, when I spoke with B. Steadwell about writing a piece on this poetry, I mentioned the blues because that too is a very specific kind of genre with very specific rules. And we all know what those, well, we musicians pretty much all know what those rules are. And this is very similar. There are rules to how that music went. We don't really know how the women's rules or if there were rules for them, but we suspect so because they were well known and they knew each other. They knew the male troubadours, they trafficked together, they often wrote together. So the rules about rhythm, when you see the notation, all you see is dots. So we don't really know what the rhythm was. So we can assume that it was set to the scansion of the text. So if the text goes da 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 da, probably the music's going to do that. So really the text is the guide. And I think what was wonderful about the way all of these different composers set the music was that they did pay attention to the text pretty much, and set the text according to how we might speak the language, even though none of us know how to speak Occitan.
And later, what was it like working this project? Because, in a way, you're celebrating women who I guess we imagine were very isolated as creative people. And yet here we have a group of women working together. What was that like for you?
I think that was, it was beautifully powerful to be in the space making the recording with these amazing musicians. And to work with the instruments, the harp, the old harp, and the flute, and the baroque flute, and the drummer and the violinist. They weren't necessarily the instruments that would have been used by the Duchess de Lorraine, but they were such amazing musicians and willing to even improvise a little and push the edge of what we were doing. That was exciting. But perhaps the most exciting thing for me was in the composing of it, feeling as if I was part of a sense of history and that I was in a line that went from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance into the modern world, and trying to make the music have that sort of form.
I mean, what was it like for you? Because you took something, there have been recordings of the same poem set to music by Beatrice before, but you come up with something different. What was that like for you?
Well, as I mentioned, the only poem that we have that was set to music by Beatrice is Ashantar, which is a beautiful piece of music. I have sung it many times and had it, programmed it many, many times. So that being the only example that we have, it kind of it teaches you how to look at the notes. As I was saying before, you look at the notes according to how the words go. When I was looking at the piece that I set, which was written by 3 different women, I looked at what the meaning of the text was and kind of went with my own modern sensibility about it.
Amelia, I know it's easy to think of this music as old, but in a way, this is a very new phenomenon. I mean, what people were doing back in this period, they were creating the first secular poetry since antiquity, and you have all this new kind of music coming in. Do you see this as fresh music, almost like some of our pop songs today?
I totally do. I totally do. Yeah, it's the sensibility of all of the music, regardless of whether you're a scholar of this particular genre. It still means the same thing. It still rings true for all of us. And we were talking about this in our composers roundtable. This is still the human condition of writing and responding to love songs, writing about the misery of your life if you've been stuck in a place, like if you become a nun and you really didn't want to, writing about being 15 years old and in love and not being able to see your boyfriend. It's all very, very current. And I think every composer wrote it that way.
Elena, I know this is not confined to just the one work you contributed in this project here, but what about writing during the confines of the pandemic, writing music? What was that like for you?
It was absolutely life-changing because I realized how I could compose 5 hours a day, every single day. I wasn't distracted by traveling and going to concerts. And I actually wrote, more music than I've ever written in a year in my life. Not hearing the pieces performed and not getting it, to that final stage was frustrating. But I think it made me kind of re-examine how I'm going to kind of manage my time and maybe be a little bit more selfish of that space.
Finally, Amelia, if people are interested in this recording or seeing some semblance of the concert, is there any way they can follow up on that?
Absolutely. We just launched the full project, 10 concerts or 10 episodes in one concert last night on Eventbrite. So if you go to our website, www.clausura.org, you'll see the Eventbrite invitation to purchase your Pay What You Can ticket, which is a pandemic kind of a thing. We're all doing Pay What You Can now. And you can get your ticket there and get the link to watch it at your leisure. You can
Thank you both
binge
very much.
watch like you do
Oh,
on Netflix,
yes.
or you can, watch one at a time.
Right. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to be with us. That was Elena Ruehr, composer and lecturer at MIT, and Amelia LeClair from Cappella Clausura. We'll have more news in just a moment.